Hello everyone, welcome to the Yoga Skates podcast series. My name's Amy McCartney. Today's episode features Dr. Patrick McCartney, who completed his PhD at ANU. His paper is on reimagining the shifting sands of Sanskrit land.
Okay, it's great to be here in London at SOAS today. I'm going to essentially take you through a journey of the Indian census. And this is the kind of current state of, or focus of the Imagining Sanskrit Land project, which goes back to 2008 when I was a graduate student studying linguistic anthropology and Sanskrit, and I came across the idea that there were parts of India where people speak fluent Sanskrit only, all the time, particularly in villages. And so for my master's kind of final project, the dissertation I had to write, I went to India and I spent 3 months in a yoga ashram in Gujarat, and that's where I ended up doing my PhD fieldwork as well, in the Shanti Mandir ashram, which is populated mostly by students who are studying Sanskrit. So I looked at sociolinguistic questions around, how is Sanskrit spoken, and when do people speak it, when is it not spoken, or when is there a shift from one language to another. Anyway, so I did that, and I went along to develop the project in terms of documenting other locations that I had found mention of across the internet. And I've been, in a kind of piecemeal way, over the past several years, conducting fieldwork when I can, because it's all basically been self-funded. And the stuff I'm showing you today is a result of having no funding to go and do fieldwork. But I've also been trying to get around to this kind of enumeration of the Sanskrit-related data from the Indian census. And this began a few years ago as well, because the last census in India was 2011. But it was not until late 2018 that this data was released for the 2011 census. So it took 7 years. So in the last 12 months, I've got around to analyzing about, I suppose, 50% of the census data from the last 2011 and 2001 censuses. But what I also managed to do was find just about every census going back to the first one in 1872. And so what I'm going to talk about today, I'm going to give you a brief kind of diachronic history of Sanskrit as it's represented in the census. And then we'll spend more time focusing on the last two censuses and how I've been understanding the data. And so the Imagining Sanskrit Land project is kind of dovetails in with my other interest in global yoga. And just to kind of put it into context, I mean, Sanskrit is a heritage language. It's a language that invokes particular moods. It cultivates certain affects. And we see this represented in countless ways. You just type in yoga and Sanskrit into the search bar and scroll through the countless links that you'll come across. So here's a few that I've just collected. So we'll start in the top left. So by chanting a mantra 108 times, we align ourselves with the will of the universe and its creative energy. Sanskrit mantras work deep to create lasting effects and healing. Sanskrit mantras are often used for healing emotional, physical, and spiritual imbalances and ailments by sending energy as a whole, not to one person. Similar to the idea of treating the root problem and not just the symptoms, Sanskrit mantras work deep to create lasting effects and healing. And the one in the middle, Sanskrit is considered by some linguists to be the perfect language, as its correct pronunciation evokes a unique vibration in the universe, placing into motion whatever you are trying to manifest through mantra. 5 ancient mantras that will transform your life. And it goes on and on like this. So Sanskrit is an instrument for transformation and accumulating power in different ways. And that's essentially what my overarching kind of research agenda is about, is exploring the political economy and symbolic capital and material culture of yoga and Sanskrit and how they work together. So that's a broad kind of look. But let's have a look at this slide. So what I'm not really going to focus on at all today is the ethnographic fieldwork that I've done in a couple of so-called Sanskrit-speaking villages. And so what I should say is that there's an interesting thing around how, or the place within the kind of Indian imagination of a kind of ideal village that's hermetically sealed from modernity and the perceived polluting influence of the West. And Sanskrit qualifies Indian village in a particularly romantic way. You find countless factoids and assertions around the idea that there are indeed these places. And so, I mean, while this is a critical academic pursuit to put this all into proper perspective, I'm also deeply empathetic towards the people who aspire to become Sanskrit speakers. I mean, it's quite interesting how and why, and even why not. I mean, you know, it's very difficult to kind of revive a language in some way, particularly if it's not a language of your community. So, yeah, on my academia page, or if you just type in my name and search for, Sanskrit, then surely a lot of my articles and films will become readily available to you. But what I'll show you is just a short vignette of a 5th episode that I've really not done anything on for 2 years now, but that episode is going to focus, I suppose, on the buffalo in the village. So, but this little clip includes some Sanskrit spoken.
ट्रैक्टर मध्ये उपयोगी चलती वा
इसका फोटो
चलत चला मग
एक इधर भी ले
किंचित किंचित तत्र बहुत ताड्यति
मार मारती है बेस
नाइसा नमो नमः
बहुन्मत्ता अस्ति सा अस्तु चलति इदानीं.
So I should point out that one thing that I've been trying to do is find these kind of non-expert or non-traditional language nest where the Sanskrit is being cultivated, because I find that a more interesting pursuit than documenting the kind of scholarly register of Sanskrit. And so I find, it's an interesting thing. So that village is here in Madhya Pradesh, in Rajgarh district, Sarangpur Tehsil in Jiru. And so this, just to kind of point this out, because it will become important when we get into the census data, but so India has a few different administrative levels. You have the nation, the state, the district, and then the sub-district level, which in Madhya Pradesh is called a tehsil. It has different names in different parts of India. And so you can see how Sanskrit is used, and the village is used here, to generate a romantic mood. And so we start under Sanskrit Boulevard. In the heart of India, the dusty hamlet of Jiri is breathing new life into a dying language. Sanskrit is the language the village speaks, swears, gossips, and romances in, says Aditya Ghosh. And it goes on to say that this Sanskrit-speaking village has been recreated carefully and painstakingly, but lives a precarious existence, cut off from the compelling realities of the world outside. 10 years have been enough for the Sanskritization of life here. Now, basically, hardly anyone in the village actually speaks Sanskrit. That's just the plain truth of it. But I find it, nonetheless, these two books by Robin Jeffrey and Asadoran, and then also by Ashish Nandian, they helped me kind of appreciate in some ways the village life and how technology makes the journey or the distance, the boundary between the village and the city to be ambiguous. And I point out Cell Phone Nation also because, basically I still chat in Sanskrit fairly regularly with some of the people in the village, so I collect data that way through WhatsApp. So Sanskrit supposedly will unify India. That's what some ideologues believe. But not only that, there are assertions made that Sanskrit will help with climate change. Modi and others have also said that. And as you've seen, at a very banal level of consumption in the global yoga-scape, there is a similar sentiment around Sanskrit's transformative power, which is linked in to. This is one of the places where you see the linking, the entanglement of an ethno-nationalist ideology with a deep eco-theology and a romantic mood, a neo-romantic mood. And so this clip is part of a syndicated news presentation about Jiri.
For the residents of this village, Sanskrit is not only a language, but also a medium to become more cultured and civilized. And this has helped them to a large extent in achieving the goals of social harmony, development, and prohibition.
Basically, you can improve your moral index by learning to speak Sanskrit. It will have an immediate, well, perhaps not immediate, but there will be some reformation of yourself. And, of course, those who are fortunate enough to hear you speak Sanskrit. So let's kind of dig down into some of the rationale. What I'm going to present regarding the Sanskrit census data, this part of the project does not need Sanskrit speakers, as it is about where people who return Sanskrit as their L1, L2, or L3 live, so the first, second, or third language. And the context of this is that Sanskrit and yoga are embedded in a shared project of cultural knowing, and that they're instruments in becoming, that is a part of a utopian aspiration to create a better world and self through a particular moral horizon. So what I've done is, over time, collected these rumors of where these supposed Sanskrit villages are. And this gives you a brief kind of glimpse of them. Now, you might have seen this data, and I suppose this is where it became or this particular project or part of the project was ideated because, you could find quite easily the data going back to 1971. But then, of course, the immediate thought I had was, well, what about all the census data before that? So I eventually found it, PDF documents of the original publications in various databases like archive.org and amongst others. But you can see, this shows you statement 7 is like a collation of the raw data. I've just highlighted the Sanskrit section for you. So you can see that there are some interesting shifts in numbers, particularly around 1991. And the argument made is that this is a result of the kind of, burgeoning nationalist sentiment that was growing around that time. And then you also have, the RSS and other organizations that prior to the census, they go around and promote that people should return Sanskrit as their first language because they believe that skewering the actual results will help Sanskrit get funding. But it was probably actually this article that came out in 2014 by Priyanka. Where are the Sanskrit speakers? Yeah, where are they? So I started looking into it. Would it be possible to kind of dig through the census data to get down to state figures as opposed to just the one I showed you before, but the state and then district and then sub-district. And it turns out they're actually pretty easy to find. And it turns out they're also kind of easy to analyze the data, at least for what I've wanting to do at this level of analysis. But so we were told that in 2001, Sitapur district in Uttar Pradesh has the highest number of speakers with 550 people. And we'll come back to Sitapur district in a moment. But it also interestingly says that the 1921 census, Madras province had the highest number of Sanskrit speakers, but basically today there are none. So this made me think, can I find this earlier census data or not? Well, if Priyanka can find it, I can find it, right? So I kind of took that attitude to it. And along the way, I started to think also about the politics of census data collection, the ethics around it, the way in which census data is collected, the kind of terms of reference that frame what data is included and excluded at various levels of enumeration, and then also the rules that the census commissioner defines. So this becomes important, and I'll explain that in a second as well. But a brief history or brief summary is that the census of India has been conducted 15 times, and it occurs every 10 years, first beginning in 1872. But the first complete census, and that's where we find the idea of a mother tongue used for the first time, was 1881. What we also find is that bilingualism was included from 1951, and then trilingualism from 1961. And that also it's worth pointing out that there have been different phrases used to capture the idea of language, and they are parent tongue, language ordinarily used, and language ordinarily spoken in the household. Now, what's interesting about this, particularly there's a couple of rules for the census enumerators, the people that go and collect the data, and they are basically they come to your house and they'll ask you as part of a set of questions, what languages do you speak? You can list 3. And so the enumerator is not allowed to kind of question, not allowed to kind of verify, oh, you speak Sanskrit. I speak Sanskrit. And then, like basically try and test them to see if they can converse in Sanskrit or not. I mean, it's a tricky thing because in my field work, I've met many people who claim they can speak Sanskrit because they know some Sanskrit prayer, or that simply they know Om, or that because they know Hindi and Sanskrit is the mother of supposedly every language in the world, then they can speak Sanskrit. These are very common responses that people give. So it becomes tricky to really trust these figures around Sanskrit, because we know that the Sangh Parivar promotes the idea, inspires people to return Sanskrit as their mother tongue, regardless whether they can speak it or not. And we also know that people have particular ideas around what it means to be a Sanskrit speaker as well, and that Sanskrit enumerators are not, census enumerators are not allowed to trivialize and question the languages that are given to them. So there are a few issues there. So we'll start with the 1951 census, and we'll go back in time after that, and then come forward in time. So it's worth pointing out that in the 1951 census, the total number of people who identified as a Sanskrit speaker were in the East India section of the data, the census kind of regions that were created. And most of them, pretty much all of them, were from Bhagalpur in Bihar. And to compare that to the 2001 census data, there are a total of 99 in Bhagalpur today, and 97 of them, basically 97%, live in an urban area. And the distinction between an urban and a rural area is basically a population cluster of 5,000 people or more makes it urban. And it gets more complicated, but that's the kind of simple binary, the arbitrary figure. So if we look into the census documents from 1951, we find that only 27 people in Bombay state returned Sanskrit as their first language, but 1,404 returned themselves as bilingual. And so if we go back to the 1891 census, you see here we have the idea of a parent tongue being included for the first time to aid future philological inquiry, which is what we're doing today. It's amazing. It's an amazing time to be alive. So what we find, the general results from the first census, this is quite interesting. Basically, the kind of anxiety that I have around trusting the results are discussed all the way back in 1891, in which we're told that, so beginning on like the fourth or fifth lines. For example, the potter gives potterish, the tanner tannerish, or the weaver weaverish as his mother tongue, especially if he be either a member of a large caste or a stranger to the locality where he is being enumerated. It's I found this quite reassuring to know that people were actually considering this and aware that this was an issue, because I was wondering if they had discussed this or not. So in the 1891 census, we can go find the Sanskrit section. 308 people returned the languages habitually spoken in their parents' household. And it's interesting that compared to the 1881 census was a reduction of 1,000 people. And as it is today, it's the people who are learning to speak Sanskrit are mostly schoolboys or undergraduates, just like the people that I did my master's fieldwork on, which is also interesting. Now, we can go and find the 1881 statistics tables, and we can find them in Form 8. And here they are. So as I showed you before, Sanskrit in the 1881 census, most 1,306 were in Madras, and only 2 were in Mumbai. And interestingly enough, I found this after, which was annoying. Someone has actually digitized this particular part of the 1881 census, and I found that on the Digital South Asia Library. They have some interesting documents there. But I also found a lot of these PDFs on archive.org and DSpace repository and the South Asia Open Archives. So the 1901 census, so we go to the tables document and we find table 10, language. And we find that there were 716 people who identified as Sanskrit speakers. And so I've blown up that part of the page so you can see it more clearly. And then we can go further into table 10A. So here it is here, and I've blown it up. So we find that 1901, there were a total of 716 speakers, and 541 of them were from Madras. So early on, Madras is overwhelmingly representing the Sanskrit-speaking population. And we can also go to the 1901 volume 15. So that's for the Madras region. And go to table 10, where we find vernaculars foreign to the presidency. And so this is the original page, which lists Sanskrit. So here it is, Sanskrit here. So you have, running from left to right, you have different languages, and then it gives the data for each district within the Madras presidency. And so here's the list of the districts. And so highlighting that data specifically to Sanskrit, we find that the Madras district within the Madras presidency in this census has the highest number. And it also does in 1911 as well, but you can see the number is already reduced significantly. And so we can go and find table 10 of the 1921 census, pull out the same data for Sanskrit in Madras, and then we can compare the 1901 and 1921 Madras lists. So here's the top 10 districts. Between these two, there were a kind of reconfigurations of the districts. Some were renamed, or some kind of consumed another district, or new districts were formed. So that's why you see this kind of some different names maybe. But you can see Madras, even again, by 1921, it's plummeted. So yeah, they're the top three. So what I did was kind of create this rough map, but I think it helps to put it into a frame that shows the movement, especially of the top three districts between these two censuses. So what I would like to do is kind of create basically, if you wanted, if you had the time and the money and the will, you could go through every census and do every district and, I don't know, create some kind of time-lapse footage to show how it works. I would like to do that. So here's the total figures for every census except, as you can see, 1941 and 1961, which I just haven't found yet. But there are some quite interesting movements, and particularly as you saw before, 1991. So yeah, that's the results for all of the censuses thus far in India. So you can find all of this data, basically, at least for the more recent censuses online. And they come in Excel spreadsheets that can have, tens of thousands of lines of data in each sheet. So there's a lot of data being crunched in this part of the project. So C16 is a particular C16, C17, and C18. I actually really haven't done anything with the C18 form, just haven't had the time. But C16 and C17 have been quite important. And you can also get these same tables for the states as well as just, the entire nation. So then it becomes kind of challenging to really juggle all of these files and the data and, cross-checking and referencing that, the numbers add up. Very easily, you can work through the night and, the sun's coming up and you're still just like staring at a screen crunching numbers because you're so, in the flow of it, which is nice sometimes. So here's some data from 2011, and I'll explain these three different kind of blocks. We'll start in the top left and work our way to the bottom right. So try and not get too overwhelmed by all these numbers. So the figures returned for the L1 Sanskrit in the 2011 census were a total of 24,821. And if we compare that with the L2 Sanskrit data, basically what we find is that people who returned Sanskrit as their first language, they had a total of 69% who returned Hindi and English as their second language. And then if we compare that with people who returned Sanskrit as their third language, returned Hindi and English at 77% as their third language. So what this data tells us is that overwhelmingly, the majority of people who identify as any type of Sanskrit speaker, and it's also the same for, if Sanskrit is the L1, then Hindi and English also feature quite prominently. It's a bit lower, but overwhelmingly, from at least the 2011 data, we can see that the people who speak Sanskrit or identify as an L1, 2, or 3 Sanskrit speaker do so while also speaking Hindi and English. So this gives us a quite interesting glimpse into who a speaker of Sanskrit is. Now, also from 2011, so the total number of L1 Hindi speakers is 422 million. English as a second language, 324 million. And L3 Sanskrit is 3.5 million. So that's the number for if you speak Hindi as your first language, English is your second, you end up with a total of 3.5 million people who identify as Sanskrit, L3 Sanskrit speaker. The total numbers for Sanskrit as an L1, L2, and L3 are the 24,821. The total number of L2 speakers of Sanskrit is 1.2 million, and total number of L3 speakers of Sanskrit is 4.1 million. So you can see, if you look at the L3 for the top line and L3 for the second line, 3.5 million people out of it, 4.1 who speak Sanskrit as their third language have Hindi and English as their first and second language, right? So overwhelmingly, this is a Hindi-speaking North Indian phenomenon, and I'll prove that even more. In the next slide, so comparing the 2011 and 2001 census data at a state level, Maharashtra has the highest number of people who return Sanskrit as their first language. Then Bihar, then Uttar Pradesh, Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, and then the South Indian state, Karnataka. But you can also see, so what I've given is on the far left and right is the total number for each state. And just have a look at Maharashtra. So 2011, 3,800 people. That's an increase from only 408 a decade before. Bihar experienced a similar increase. Uttar Pradesh, however, had a drastic reduction of more than 50%. Rajasthan also had a pretty healthy uptick. And Madhya Pradesh also. But Karnataka, not so much. So this also shows that the people who identify as Sanskrit speakers, we already know that Hindi and English are the predominant other languages. And now we also know that most of them come from North India. Now let's have a look at Uttar Pradesh. Let's dial in on one particular state. So I've done some more fine-grained analysis and map making of a couple of the states. I hope to get around to more next year. So Uttar Pradesh, as I just showed you, there was a significant reduction in between the last two censuses. And we can also get down to a distinction between rural and urban. So you can see here that there were more people, just slightly more people who live in an urban environment. And this is also quite telling. If you go through the data comparing urban and rural, overwhelmingly the majority of people live in urban environments. So this idea even of a Sanskrit-speaking village is also kind of myth-busted by the census data. And if we look at the districts of Lucknow, Unnao, and Gorakhpur, there were a huge reduction. I don't know if these people all moved to Maharashtra or Madhya Pradesh. You know, is that what happened? I'd have to go and find the Sanskrit speakers and ask these questions. At least I now know where they are in the districts, and I'll show you which districts I ought to go to next. But you can see here, Uttar Pradesh, the state totals for 2011, 2001, that was a 57% reduction. And then dropping down to the district level, so Sitapur district in 2001 had an 83% reduction. It went from a total of 43% for the Uttar Pradesh's total, down to 24% in 2011. But Kanpur Nagar, so basically the city of Kanpur, which is one of the most polluted cities in India, and it really makes you think, like, can Sanskrit actually help climate change if, the place where the most speakers of Sanskrit at the last census are, is also one of the most polluted cities in India. So, getting around to the eco-theology aspect of the rhetoric that promoters of Sanskrit use, there are some issues. Anyway, the percentage increase is just incredible. So there's that. Okay, so here is a rough map I've made. The other nicer looking maps were made with the ANU cartography service in the College of Asia Pacific. And so the maps I have are actually free to use according to the attribution license. Now, so this is the 2011 results, total results for all the districts in Uttar Pradesh. You can pick out, so Kanpur urban that's Kanpur Nagar, so 932. Sitapur district had 722, and you can probably, the green one, maybe it sticks out with the yellow numbers. Sultanpur district, 322. And Ghaziabad has 128. So they're like the top 4 in Uttar Pradesh. So here's one of the nicer maps. So feel free to use them. Just attribute them to this, to the cartogis at CAP. So here's a clearer map with Sitapur district. Now let's dial in on Sitapur district. As remember, Priyanka told us that it had the most number of speakers, and we'll come back to Priyanka in a minute. So let's start with the 2001. So the grey map. So there was a total of 4,222 people in Sitapur district out of the Uttar Pradesh's state total of 7,048 were in Sitapur district. More than half. It's incredible. And you can see Biswan district had 2,687. Biswan Tehsil within Sitapur district had more than half. Almost 3/4. And Mishrik had another basically quarter. But you look at the figures for them today, and they don't even make the century. Biswan has only 83. Mishrik has 21. Where did all the speakers go? So you can see, I really should just go to Sitapur district and ask around, like, what happened? Where did they go? Oh, yeah. Okay, so there, Mahmudabad, 482. Laharpur goes from 430 to 6. Sitapur goes from 83 to 36. And Mishrik, 919 to 21. And Sidoli, 80 to 94. So Sidoli, I guess... Oh, Mahmudabad wins for sure. So here is actually, just to prove that I'm not making these numbers up, this is the raw data from the Excel spreadsheets for C16 for Uttar Pradesh. So you can see the total 7,048, and then Biswan 2687, Mishrik 919, Laharpur 430, blah, blah, blah. And the same if you look down below at the 2011, there's only 3062, Mahmudabad 482, Sitapur only 722. So coming back to Priyanka. Now, I don't know who Priyanka is. I've written to her, social media handles, and she's never responded, so that's a pity. But we continue on our quest to find Sanskrit speakers. So the top screenshot is the data that Priyanka provided from the 2001 census. Now, it would seem that Priyanka is a bit confused by districts and sub-districts because, as you'll see in the table below. So let's start with Sitapur. So Sitapur Tehsil only had 83. But Priyanka said that in 2001, there were 558. But the actual district of Sitapur had 4,222. So she's actually got it quite wrong, actually. And if you look at Unnao, so Priyanka asserts that there were 334 in the Unnao district, but in actual fact there were only 29. But there's also, so the thing I should point out is that there is also, not only is there a district Sitapur, there is a tehsil. This is where it gets confusing. You have many districts also have a sub-district with the same name, and quite often also there is a town as well. So it gets really confusing, like what numbers are you actually looking at? So that's why here I've lined up so that the data for the tehsil by this name, and then also the district data that Priyanka asserts, but compared to the actual data given by the census, and then also comparing that with the district census data from 2011. So the only one that she almost gets right is Lucknow. Yeah. And she doesn't, and then she confuses the Gorakhpur district data with the Gorakhpur tehsil data. But it doesn't matter. I mean, she's way off the district data anyway. So yeah, Priyanka has been myth busted. Let's carry on and look at Madhya Pradesh and then also Maharashtra, because they were kind of the top three states. So I've done them first. And I will make a better map, or at least commission a better map to be made. So if you know where Bhopal is, it's a pink one, kind of just left of center, and that had 249 people. But that's only roughly 50% of the highest figure, which was from Hoshangabad, which is in the south of Bhopal, with 524. And you can see maybe next to Bhopal, the Rajgarh district, that's where Jiri is. And there's only 61 people in Rajgarh district return Sanskrit as their first language. But I can tell you that there's supposedly like 1,000 people that live in Jiri, in the Sanskrit-speaking village of Jiri. I mean, but only 61 people identified as L1 Sanskrit. Now what I've done here is each of these 4 images contains, so you've got the Bhopal district within the state of Madhya Pradesh, and within Bhopal district there are 2 sub-district zones. So you have Bhopal and Barasia. So just to kind of explain, the one that I've kind of scratched in the red lines, that's the district where the majority of the people from these, that's the sub-district, the tehsil, where the majority of Sanskrit speakers are identified as within each district within the state. And so in Hoshangabad district, which had the highest number in the state, 524, most of them, like 98% or something, are in Pipariya tehsil. So this is definitely one place that I would like to go to, is Pipariya tehsil. And Indore, within the Indore district, the Indore tehsil and the city of Indore has the highest number. And interesting also in Rajgarh district, so where Jiri is, the highest number come from Sarangpur, but interestingly enough, I think there's only one person from, when you take it down to like the rural urban thing, the overwhelming majority come from like Rajgarh, the town of Rajgarh, not from the village, the supposed like famous Sanskrit-speaking village of Jiri, which is fascinating. So let's move on to Maharashtra. So here I kind of created again a sort of heat map to roughly show you where the main speakers are, or people who identify. And it, again, you could possibly see that it's an urban phenomenon predominantly. And so I've done a similar thing with these 4 maps to show that the top 4 districts within India, within Maharashtra. So within Pune district, it's the tehsil of Pune city. Within Thane district, it's the tehsil of Thane, which is very urban. Nashik district, it is the Nashik tehsil, and within that, the city of Nashik that has the main. And the same with Nagpur. So they're all urban areas where most of the people who speak Sanskrit in Maharashtra are. Now, comparing this data, so I've listed some of the more prominent tehsils from Madhya Pradesh and Uttar Pradesh. So I have the state that they're located within, the tehsil name, Pipariya, Sarangpur, Kanpur, Indore, Mahmudabad, and Huzur. And given their populations, just total population, not like, these aren't figures for how many people speak Sanskrit or anything. Then their literacy rates, sex ratio, the political preference, and the percentage of the community that identifies as Hindu. So it's interesting. So these are the places where a lot of people supposedly speak Sanskrit. And what we're told is that if you know Sanskrit, this will make you smarter. But I mean, these are some of the lowest literacy rates in India. And some of these sex ratios are also some of the lowest in India. And I mean, I suppose it's not surprising that the political preference. So, I mean, you can go and find all this data available. Pretty much every local election up to the national elections that data is available on certain websites. So we also know that as a general trend, people are Hindu and vote BJP if they identify as a Sanskrit speaker. So just to summarize, basically, the Sanskrit data is unreliable due to the rules of enumeration, which I explained. You can't really question or try and verify whether someone speaks any language, not just Sanskrit. And the data is skewed because institutions like the RSS suggest that individuals should nominate Sanskrit, even if they don't speak it. And also people have a broad idea of what it means to be a Sanskrit speaker. And all of this is done to ensure that Sanskrit retains its scheduled status. So according to the Constitution, if a scheduled language falls below 10,000 L1 speakers, then it would lose its status. So this is where I mean that the politics of census data collection and I suppose that coercive impulse to ensure that Sanskrit stays above this arbitrary figure of 10,000 is something that would appear to be going on. And also, Sanskrit and anyone who identifies as a Sanskrit speaker is a Hindi and English speaker also. The majority of people who identify as a Sanskrit speaker live in an urban environment, and we also know that the people who speak or identify as a Sanskrit speaker live in North India. This is compelling. This shows that Sanskrit, the promotion of Sanskrit, or at least the fascination and interest, resolve to even identify as a Sanskrit, whether or not people can speak it or not, is a thoroughly kind of Hindi belt phenomenon. So now we know where to go, at least in the top 3 states. And what I hope to do in the time to come is continue with analyzing the census data, make more of these maps, the better quality ones as well. I would like to find funding to conduct in-country fieldwork. I would like to make more films, and I would like to finish the monograph that I have partly written. So if you want to help with the funding thing, please contact me. So I'd like to thank SOAS for inviting me and the Graduate School of Global Environmental Studies at Kyoto, the Japan Society for the Promotion of Science, the Australian National University, the South Asia Research Institute, and also the Anthropology Institute at Nanzan University in Nagoya. And just to finish, these are some of my articles that are coming out very soon. So you can check them out. They'll be up on my academia page, and I'm sure I'll spam the world when they come out, but everything you can find at my academia page anyway. And if you want to stay in touch, so this is my website, yogascapesinjapan.com. You can find my email, my academia, and Twitter, and Instagram, and Facebook. So that is it. Thank you for listening. I look forward to your comments, your feedback, your criticisms, and your support going forward. So thank you.
Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed the presentation. In the meantime, have a look at the Yogascapes page at yogascapesofjapan.com for more episodes. Until next time.